Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Riki Ellison. I'm the founder and chairman of the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance. I'm wishing you a good morning from Los Angeles, California. About 5 blocks from here, I was first introduced to missile defense about 41 years ago in 1980. And today we're also moving forward with our global space and missile defense program at USC. We're doing this all for the purpose and mission, making our world a safer place. We believe the deployment, the development of missile defenses saves lives, deters conflicts, and makes our world safer. And today's discussion is about that. We have fielded a phenomenal system that nobody really knows about, that has been a highlight. It has offered deterrent, it has offered defense, it has saved thousands and thousands and thousands of lives in Afghanistan during the 20 years of that conflict. It helped save the lives and secured the airport of everyone on the evacuation. It is a special system. It is a system that's a pioneer system that was developed by a different military service, the Navy, fielded by a different military service, the Army, rapidly put together quickly because of the urgency of the need for this system. It is deployed and operational today in the Middle East on other forward operating bases, saving lives and defending both our allies, the country's nationals, and our troops forward. We often talk about, well, we do talk about the new strategic deterrent. In fact, the Army Fires Conference in Oklahoma, Fort Sill, significantly talked about that this week. We talk about strategic deterrence at a high level against our near peers. But at the low level, missile defense, rocket, counter rocket, counter mortar also does that effective deterrent to save and to stop, not conflict, but be able to deter much more strikes on us than there were. So today, we're going to study this, and we've brought the very best retired out of the Army air defense systems that were the critical decision makers to bring this capability forward, to implement it, and to make it what it is today. So we're very, very honored to have with us retired Lieutenant General Bob Lennox, retired Brigadier General Randy McIntyre, retired Colonel Dave Shank, all three critical in making this system happen. So today we're going to have each one of them spend about 10 minutes talking about their thoughts on this program and their thoughts on the defense of fires in Afghanistan. And then I will ask a question or two, and we'll move through those three speakers. And at the end, we'll have our new MDA board member, our senior fellow, Randall McIntire, retired Major General Joaquin Malavet, will then field the questions by the public to go forward. So it's a great honor for me to meet just a distinguished gentleman in all levels, well respected. He is Bob Lennox has been the commander of every command air defense has in the Army, and ended up being the deputy director of CAPE, which is the cost analysis for the Pentagon. So I want everybody to welcome, and I welcome retired General Bob Lennox. Bob?
Hey, Riki, thanks. And more importantly, thanks for what you do for missile defense and have done for missile defense. And I think I told you earlier that I haven't been doing a lot of air missile defense related discussions, topics since my retirement, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to, when you mentioned it to me, I didn't want to miss the opportunity today to highlight and thank all those folks who brought this capability together and made this happen. So thanks for allowing me to do this. I really appreciate it. I'm grateful to be on the panel with Brigadier General retired Randy McIntyre, Colonel retired Dave Shank. You'll find pretty soon when I start talking about Randy, the integral role that he played in all of this. And you know, I told you in preparation, I had a very minor role. My minor role involved turning to Randy and say, fix everything and make it happen. And he'll describe all the hard stuff. But I do have some things I really do want to talk about, and I appreciate this opportunity. For me, it started when I took command of the Air Defense Artillery School in Fort Bliss, Texas, in the summer of 2005. Now, folks had fielded the capability in theater and done the hard work of getting the first units and capability out the door. And I was able to track it from afar and with pride for what the air defense community did. And I say the air defense community, but it's a greater community. But first, let me thank and recognize the people in PDC RAM. Mike Van Rassen was the program director, lieutenant colonel at the time. Later continued on in that role as a civilian after he retired. But Mike put this team together, and it was a team that worked with industry, worked with other services to bring this capability to bear. And I think it's the highlight of the acquisition corps. Randy and I talked about a few highlights in our career. This is certainly one of them. But when you watch the acquisition team with industry and bring this capability, put the pieces together to make it happen and save lives, it was simply amazing. And Mike was the quarterback for this effort. Hats off to Northrop Grumman and their team that brought FAD-C² capabilities to bear and took it from an amazing capability and made it awesome. And then for Raytheon to do things like take the failing system primed and ready to go on a ship. In some cases, they took them off ships, put them on trailers, integrate it, and make it happen. The vision that brought this together, the funding that came from the Army staff, from Congress to make it happen was one of a kind. And I'm very proud to play a small role in this system that took air defense radars, the Sentinel, took field artillery systems, their radars, the lightweight counter mortar radar, the counter fire radars, integrating them and to make each piece make 1 + 1 = 3. And the acquisition team, some say I may be critical of the acquisition team from now occasionally. This is one of the major times, and I think they've just hit a home run. And I think it would be right to emphasize their role and the importance of their role to start. So I really do think this was a joint effort. And at Fort Bliss, we welcome the sailors coming in to help us train. We welcome the soldiers that came in that we were able to put together and train as a team. And then we work with Major General Dave Ralston up at the Fire Center at that time at Fort Sill, sending in his very best experts to help train us on the radars and systems. We had a great team at Fort Bliss, Texas at that time. Dan Kirby and a team at Combat Developments did things like took the skills that we had for Patriot, for planning and for seeing where rounds were fired from, and did analysis of where we should put these systems in theater. We shouldn't overlook what people and civilians in that directorate did. And I can remember with pride, we would analyze the results of all these engagements as they took place. Pride that our team had been able to do this, that we're saving lives, that we're frustrating the bad guys, and we're causing soldiers, sailors, civilians at these key bases in Iraq at the time to have confidence in the system and confidence that their army team, this joint team, would come together and save their lives. So very proud to be involved with that. In the middle of all the success that was happening early, pretty soon after I took command, it dawned on me one day that we hadn't done anything really to think about the very next unit that was going to deploy and how they were going to be trained and how we're going to get that capability together to make that happen. So I turned to the team at the 32nd AAMDC, commanded by Rick McCabe and later Fran Mann, and said, okay, who's next? We've had this success. We've got these guys out the door. Who's next? And they all looked at each other and said, I don't know. We'll figure it out. So again, they put their heads together. We did get sailors. We got short-range air defense units. We got active at the time, but later the National Guard, to all contribute and make a difference. By the way, the operations officer at the 32nd AAMDC that time was a young, not so successful colonel by the name of Jim Dickinson, who I guess has turned out pretty well in the end. We're very proud of Jim and his 4-star U.S. Space Command role that he's still playing to this day. So I did turn to this young lieutenant colonel who was commanding the 2nd Battalion of the 6th Air Defense Artillery Brigade, who was training Avenger soldiers. And Avenger was going out of the force at the time. It was there for the National Guard. And I said, Randy McIntyre, we need you to head up this effort to figure out how we're going to attend. My hat's off for Randy for doing that. He really made things happen. He and his team, Dave was part of the team, he and his team made that difference for us because they routinized all the things that we talk about that you do in training and doctrine command. Creating the doctrine, the organization, who you need to deploy, making sure the material was there and synchronized for them when they needed it, trained all these folks in new and strange systems, built a leadership. We found that we were having problems with maintenance of these one-off systems. It wasn't a program of record. There's no sustainment tail that goes with these ad hoc programs that you put them together. And when they started to blink in country, it took the effort of folks like Randy to put together the teams that would have the expertise to figure out how to do maintenance, how to sustain them over time, how to get spare parts, and to really make these things happen. So I'm glad that Randy's on the panel and we'll talk next. Before he does that, I do want to highlight for everybody that my daughter is an Army major. She's a psychologist and is deployed to a not to be mentioned base in northeastern Iraq today. And they get warning of drone attacks, and it's happened multiple times. And I'm very proud of her. She's able to wake everybody up and get them into the bunkers. And a psychologist, who would believe it, a psychologist is calling in status reports on the fact that everybody's accountable or not. So I think it's something that we started as a team 16, 17 years ago. Made such a difference in Kabul there at the end, and is making a difference today in Iraq. So very proud to be involved with this, proud of the team that put it together. I mentioned a fraction of the names of the people that were responsible. Maybe Randy will highlight some more, but I want to thank you for the opportunity today, Riki, to just be able to single those people out. One of the major highlights of my career, to be involved in a small way in this program that saves soldiers' lives. So I'll turn it over to you for the important conversations.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for your gratitude and recognition of those that made this system. A couple things I wanted to ask you, just for the general public, because I think at the same time, the Iron Dome was starting to happen. What's the difference, or why did we not bring the Iron Dome into this, and why did we stay with CRAM? Was it because obviously we're using it effectively on the ships, but if you could explain generally the difference between the two programs, and if even that was an option, because both of them were at the early development at that stage, I believe.
A great thought. What was going on at the time was Iron Dome was still in its developmental stage. The Missile Defense Agency was working with Israel to refine the missiles that are being used there, the architecture that was being used there, and we couldn't wait. We had to move quickly. The idea of phalanx guns proven, demonstrated that they were capable of intercepting the mortars, the rockets, enabled us to move very quickly. And then the fact that we were able to integrate it with existing systems, Army systems already in theater, was ideal. The sense and warn capabilities that came with the FADC squared system melded seamlessly into this one system. Now, hats off to what's gone on with Iron Dome and how effective it's been in deterring conflicts, saving lives, frustrating evil people's designs since that time. But it simply wasn't ready and proven at that time.
You know, it's the amount of public understanding of the Iron Dome is so vast because of the publicity that it has done in a foreign country in a public setting. Where you look at ours, the CRAM in our forward operations, we can't talk about, we can't, be proud of it because we don't want to give that information to the enemy. I would say from my perspective that it had at least the same amount or more hits and intercepts during that period of time. And they don't get any credit. And this is one of the, we want to recognize that aspect of it. Bob, in your position in Cape, also in this position, you knew you had a case. It worked. But you had, I don't know what there is, 78 forward operating bases? I mean, there are a lot of bases out there. Yet we limited the production of this. We limited the capacity that we could have to defend more bases and defend more deterrent. Can you go into that decision making? Because I know we limited it out. I don't know what the number of batteries are, but certainly not enough to do what we could do to best defend our forward operating troops forward. What were the limits on that, and why didn't we move forward to have more capacity?
Yeah, a great question, Riki. I think what we did was we focused first on the large troop population areas and made sure that Victory, Blot Air Base, some of the key places that were being targeted at the time were covered as a first priority. And then, and to do that, we were frankly taking some of this equipment off ships, certainly diverting it before it went onto a ship and taking it off the ships and minimizing their capability. So the phalanx guns were kind of a long pole at the tent at that moment to get that capability everywhere. But the sense and warn capability was proliferating. And what the PM was able to do was to net some of these radars together such that instead of just defending one fob, they were able to architecture and start defending extended area. So we found that the places that weren't being hit as frequently, if you had a good sense and warn capability, that you could save lives that way too. So I think it was really equipment at the time, but it was the fact that we were able to focus on the most important areas first.
And you would take credit for the defense against last January against the strikes from Iran under our bases with this sensor warn capability that you're talking about, correct?
Right.
That would be correct, right? But Bob, I still want to go to that. We know the requirements. Why aren't we doing more capacity? Why didn't we spend more dollars? If we knew this system worked, why didn't we do more? Because it wasn't a program of record? What's and really going forward, Bob, why aren't we doing more? Are we waiting for the next IFPIC to come forward? Just help us understand that. If you
can. So it's hard for me to judge what's going on now, and I don't want to second guess or judge the people that are in the job that I had years ago that are in it today. At the time, I think it was a capability, the numbers that drove us to a certain number that we could have. Availability of phalanx, like I said, and numbers of soldiers and effort you could train. Could we have done more? I think in hindsight, because it was so successful, we probably could have done more and had more systems out there and more capabilities out there. I was a little bit surprised it took us so long to get this kind of capability into Afghanistan over time, but we did. But it just took us a little bit longer than I thought we should have.
Well, thank you, Bob. Your legacy and the decisions you made, this wouldn't have happened. So you deserve a lot of credit for the courage of your decision making to put and field this and make that happen. So thank you for that, and thank you for spending some time with us on that. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please put in questions at missiledefenseadvocacy.org, and we'll filter them into the discussion. Our next guest is a great one, Randy. He is the first general to own for the Futures Command the cross-functional air and missile defense, which is Future Capabilities Air and Missile Defense. I met Randy just at that time, probably back in 2004 or 5, when he was a lieutenant colonel of a battalion, and his role was to convert that battalion into a CRAM battalion, which was tremendous. But and I give you, sir, a lot of credit. What a wonderful career you've had, an impact you've had, and to be the first in the Futures Command on that cross-functional team says a lot about you, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, retired Brigadier General Randy McIntyre.
Hey, Ricky, thanks for this opportunity, and it's always great to be a part of these important discussions. And General Lennox, having the opportunity to collaborate with you again, it's wonderful, and I thank you for the confidence that you had in me those many years ago. And I would tell you that this was the high water mark of my career. I did a lot of great things over the years, but having the opportunity to implement things, innovate, build units, and go fight them, it doesn't get any better than that, quite frankly. And this provided that opportunity. And Dave Shank will talk to me. He did a wonderful job as my operations officer as we were in Iraq, covering 17 different forward operating bases simultaneously. We started a lot of the site surveys from Iraq into Afghanistan. Those discussions were starting to happen as they wanted to move that capability into Afghanistan on our watch. But I tell you what I think is really important. This was pre the BRAC move from Fort Bliss to Fort Sill, but you started to see the collaboration and this idea of fires happening, and this was at the tactical level with this capability, and you know the sense, the warn, the intercept, and then the response piece. You know, that was pretty much the pillars of this capability. You had to sense it. If you can't see it, you can't kill it. You need to warn the population, and then intercept and protect the defended assets. And then the next important piece was that response piece, which went full circle. And that was the collaboration between offensive and defensive fires, in aviation, and whatever the response element would have been to get after that. And we started to see that really working in Iraq, and it took several years to work through that cycle and make a difference. And then towards the end in Iraq, you started to, you know, the response piece was through the Iraqis, so it was not necessarily a U.S.-led response. And so, as you would expect, that was a little bit slower and took a little bit of time to mature and develop. But it was important to make that transition into the folks that were responsible for protecting their country. When I look at the fires piece of this, it's really I use a boxer analogy, and I've used it numerous times in the past. You know, from a defensive fires position, you're a boxer in the ring and you're just blocking and you're blocking and you're blocking, but you have the inability to strike. And from an offensive field artillery perspective, you're striking, but you really can't block. And so as we started working on these concepts that would bring the agility I think that was needed, certainly at the tactical level, that now, as you can see, as we move forward in the 21st century, and we start to think about large-scale combat operations and taking on near-peer threats, we need to get back at this and bring that up to the operational and theater level fires, in my opinion. And so what was born out of all that was the Fire Center Excellence. So I think we're sitting in a postured in a place that we can take the lessons learned from this capability and move it forward and apply it. As this started, it was very immature, and and I'm glad General Lennox talked about Mike Van Rassen and the team there, and the people like John DeForno, the scientists that were really pulling this stuff together. And it was exciting. We were just having this interface back and forth between combat and hey, what about this? Can we get it to do this? And trying to explain why a gun didn't shoot at a projectile flying over it, because it was going to land somewhere else outside the gun defended area, and just educating leaders on the ground of what the capabilities and limitations of the system was at the time. But when you think about the rapid development, a joint urgency operations needs statement that came in, and really about less than a year, 11 months, some capability provided. At the beginning, did it have its warts? Absolutely, as anyone would expect. But they fought through that, especially on the sense and warn, getting the radars to work together. Were there false alarms early? Yes. And the team really worked hard to figure out how to start eliminating those things and making radars work together and get the timing right. And then throwing in that intercept piece and just continuing to do upgrades over time that everybody benefited down the road. You never would see it on your watch. It would come on somebody else's watch, the work that was put into the spiral development of it. Again, initially starting off this Navy system, not a lot of Army folks understanding it. We relied on our Navy counterparts hugely to operate and maintain the Phalanx weapon system, which was their close-in weapon system. I remember the fire controllers and just really relying on those guys to keep that system working. So there was some early lessons learned, and then we adapted. So you got to adapt. And the Navy was running its own independent site. The Army was running its own independent site initially on, and having different levels of success. So you had the Navy doing very well with their weapon system, but maybe not so well with the command and control and plugging into the Army logistics systems and that. You had the Army that was doing okay with the command and control and understand how the Army works, but they were having a difficult time, maintaining a naval gun system. And then guys like in the multinational corps headquarters, they came up with the Joint Intercept Battery. And what we did was started playing to our strengths between the Army and Navy, and we had these batteries that were both Army and Navy. And that's when I think the turning point in the level of performance started to happen. You started to see more intercepts, better sense and warn, just across the board, increasing the efficiency of the system. And that bought time for the Army eventually. Who would have thought we'd still be there 20 years, or longer in these systems, but over time, that bought time for the Army to learn that from an industry standpoint. Now that allowed them to get the field service representatives, the Navy guys retiring, et cetera, to come in and start to fill a role where, the Navy stuck with us for a really long period of time, and eventually the Army took it over. And from an Army standpoint, it was a total Army effort. We had the Army National Guard units get involved with this, and because we were really struggling with the short range air defense capacity. And to your question earlier, Riki, about why didn't we have enough of this? Well, it really became down to money and dot mil PF and units. As we started to divest the short range air defense force, we still found ourselves very heavily involved with the theater ballistic missile, the TBM force, the Patriot force, really since Desert Shield, Desert Storm involved in the Middle East. So there wasn't a lot of capacity. So then again, our field artillery partners, they took some rotations on CRAM and our National Guard. So this was a total Army effort to be able to sustain this over a long time. But in closing, you know, it's a really great news story. I think a lot of Yankee ingenuity at the beginning of taking bits, parts, and kits and pulling it together with some commercial off-the-shelf technologies as well, and getting these capabilities, you know, put together and continuing to spiral development. And I'll leave you with a little. I'll let Dave talk about training up and MREs and all the stuff that he was hugely successful. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say I had a wonderful XO, Bill Darnay. You know that. You know, I had. You know, we were able to handpick the best and the brightest to go forward to do a lot of this work. And the young Captain Doug Simmons, who's now Lieutenant Colonel Simmons, and just the names you can just go on the list, Command Sergeant Major Paris Williams and others that really you know made it a team effort. And I would also be remiss if I didn't talk about Joe D'Antona to a degree. That was the brigade commander that kind of he provided the right level of guidance with General Lennox and other leaders to set the tone for success. If we had gotten the wrong type of leader, we could have got a totally different result, in my opinion. They were able to resource you, give you enough guidance, but you know they didn't micromanage. And this was one of those things where you needed to have the flexibility to move and coordinate and do things on it. The final story, I realized we were doing something pretty good when I was in a line, you know, at a makeshift PX shop that everybody was lined up to go get, you know, some gum and other things that we were looking for to get. And there was a young female soldier that was standing in a line in front of me, and she was talking to another soldier, and it was kind of doing this little handoff between the two, and reminded me of my daughter. That's how young she was at the time, and she was. The one girl looked up and said, "What's that on the hill over there?" We were in Baghdad at Victory Base, and she goes, "Oh, that's Maximus." And Maximus was the name of one of our guns that was sitting up there. And she goes, "That's Maximus. And Maximus keeps me safe. And it's going to keep you safe." And she went on to describe, you know, how the whole, you know, if you hear the alert, hit the dirt. And they're sensing warn, and those guns are there, and they're here to protect us. And I realized, even if that gun didn't work that day, she was able to function. She was able to walk around and do her job with a level of confidence that there was something in place. And I think there was that to me was a proud moment that I knew we were doing something good, and people were able to function and do their jobs, you know. So anyhow, I'll put pause there. I look forward to any questions you got, but thanks, because I love telling old war stories.
Mark, that's top notch, and that's setting the conditions to win, setting the environment to win, stabilizing the environment to win. I like to, because of your positions, you were able to use two services basically and meld that together. If we look in the future, do we need to roll a mission, the service, to develop a certain capability? Or do we need to do what we just did, where we see other capabilities from other services and transition them over? And I'm saying this is a successful position here. We're looking at Aegis on ground in the same way to some extent. So from your perspective, because again, like you said, you brought diversity of different thought and different ways of doing it and made the system even better than it would have if it just stayed in those two services. Is that a future way of cross development, or is that just too difficult to do? And these are only special cases.
Well, Riki, great question, and I never really thought about it, but I do think that the exposure, and it's always, more minds taking a look at the problem sets, probably gives you a better solution in the end. I don't know if you can afford to do it every time, but certainly, we could afford to take these systems that everybody else, some other service has invested in, and see how they work. Based upon the requirements and the capabilities needed. But I always love the conversations that I have with the sailors that were assigned and working for me, because they made us better. They would ask some hard questions, and it's a difference between the cultures for sure. And that was something that we had to work on. And I'll never forget Command Sergeant Major Paris Williams. First thing he did, we had everybody together. And we never actually had everybody together in the States. The sailors, the 200 sailors plus or minus that we had, they came from about 190 different, they're all individual augmentees. And then we had Fort Bliss units, Fort Hood units. And so I think in the end, that actually made us work pretty good in a combat situation, being decentralized, because we just learned to operate that up front and built that into our battle rhythm. But Paris Williams told the group that we had together, we're not going to make the soldiers into sailors, and we're not going to make sailors into soldiers, but we're going to leverage everybody's strengths and weaknesses. From an Army perspective, and I hate to just characterize everybody, Army wants to lead. They want to lead, they want to be in charge, and they're ready to make a difference. What I learned from the Navy, at least the folks they were very concerned about knowing what was behind the button and what made it work. Much, I won't say that we're not technical, but they were definitely very, very technical, and they would take things to a degree that I think was much needed. And people in Huntsville, scientists and engineers could have some great conversations, and finding the right people that can operate between those two worlds was key, I think. Somebody who needs to understand how to operate the system versus somebody that knows how to build the system and make it better. And so having those different types of leaders, I think, propelled it much quicker than would have been if it had been stovepiped in each individual service.
Thank you, Randy. And the other thing that you really brought up that's so intriguing was the offense-defense mix at that level, where not only are you doing passive defense, you're doing active defense, but you're doing strike, which creates the ultimate integrated deterrent at that level, right? So again, it looks like this system is a little bit of a pioneer to where we're going on multi-domain force, when we're mixing perhaps hypersonic strike. And we're doing this, by the way, Army Navy's doing the same thing you're doing with hypersonic strike with Neil Thurgood. And now mixing our fires. I know we do it at the schoolhouse, but actually doing it out and above in the forward operating theaters, in our regional theaters, to create a much stronger deterrent. So you want to comment on that? Because I think, this is really well received at the low tactical level. I know there's a lot of policy engagement when you start moving it to a much higher level with Patriot, with our next generation lift picks, with LT, all that stuff coming, and even higher. And that's what you heard Chase Richardson, all that big level going integrated deterrent. But I'll leave that little thought to you. Go ahead.
All right. What I'll say was this was a great leadership laboratory across the board. And we were able to take some of these concepts of the fires, center excellence was, I think a vision that we were pushing towards at the time. And this really lent itself to, again, at the tactical level, working, just trying to get all the radars working together, the firefinders, the LCMRs, we had the Saab Giraffe radar, multitude of different radars, forced us to think about things. And then just the sensor management piece. what we learned, many lessons there, is just because you got a radar doesn't mean you need to turn on. Because there's a lot of kit that was getting pushed out to the brigade combat teams and et cetera. So just working through that feeds into what the 1-1-1 strategy was. Hey, one sensor, one shooter and one command and control. Very simplified in thought, a little harder to do in reality, but there's certainly, with these different things out there, we should be able to leverage, and get the most out of what this particular radar was designed to do, because they're all optimized a little bit differently when you really get to understand what these things do. But I think we were definitely on the front edge, and there's a lot of applications to moving things forward. I think the Army modernization, the Army Futures Command is really setting the pace in terms of what's really, really important. And there's no doubt, too, the 6 Army priorities are sitting on Fort Sill, Oklahoma, with long-range precision fires and air missile defense. So I think everybody sees the value. I think when you look at a battlefield in the future in 2050, you're going to have capabilities that are just working simultaneously together, or we're going to get our lunch ate. You can't say, hey, I'm blocking, hey, I'm striking. Well, it's going to have to be block, strike, move on.
Thanks, Randy. That's awesome. Our next speaker, former retired Colonel Dave Shank of the 10th AAMDC, was Randy's operations officer. I think, we've done a lot of strategic discussion so far, Dave. We really, for the general public that really don't know how this thing works, can you maybe, as the operations guy, tell everybody how the thing works and some of the cool things about it, the ammo and all that stuff? Just a real brief, because I think we've dodged that a little bit. And that's something that's important for people to understand, and how it actually protected the Kabul airport and so forth.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Riki, and thanks to you and your team at the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance for allowing me to participate today with 2 heavy hitters. You've got the dull tool in the shed here now, and to somewhat mimic General McIntyre's words and General Lennox, I was only as good as the people around me. And it was guys like Schneider and Wade, and McDonald, and others that really was taking the fight to the enemy every day during our deployment. I can answer several of those questions, and that's what I did want to do. So I appreciate that, Riki, about having the opportunity to talk about the tactical level of not just war fighting, but and not just the story of Task Force 3-3 and our deployment to Iraq, but what that correlation looks like with what we saw just less than a week ago at HKIA, Hamid Karzai International Airport there in Kabul. The only U.S. coalition location at the time in Afghanistan. So really, that you didn't have to tell the enemy more than that. So you talk about an enemy moving to the sound of the guns to a single target. It was only just really a matter of time before there was some type of indirect fire event at HKIA. But before I get into the correlation piece, if I may, and I'll try to be brief, in the case of Task Force 3-3, what it came down to, really, in my mind, was basic warfighting fundamentals, things such as the military decision-making process, understanding air defense artillery and employment principles such as mutual support, weighted coverage, balanced fires. General McIntyre talked about the gun there at Camp Liberty, Maximus, and its tactical location. Yes, on a hilltop, but yet still has both the negative and obviously the positive angle to conduct engagements and provide those defensive fires to those critical assets that it was assigned to that position to do just that. Again, the fundamentals, understanding enemy tactics, techniques, and procedures, leveraging the intelligence community at all echelons, government and non-government, American and non-American, integration with battle space owners. General McIntyre talked about the 17 forward operating bases in which we had capability, and the integration that down to the sergeant level at times, integrating with battalion commanders. These are infantry battalion command, at a FOB such as maybe Gary Owen out in Diyala province. And you talk about austere environment. That young sergeant leading those 7 or 8 soldiers and doing just that, tasks that we normally require lieutenants and captains to perform, and do so at the requisite level. And then one other maybe fundamental to talk about is battle drills. General McIntyre talked about offensive, defensive fires, and how do you come full circle? You take an indirect fire shot to the face, so to speak, at a FOB. Is there a call for fire mission possible? Is there an aviation hunter killer team within proximity to conduct some type of flyover, some type of show of force, some type of counter fire strike from air to surface? And those battle drills were extremely challenging, and you were asking young soldiers, privates and corporals, to be able to respond, within seconds to provide that. Understanding the enemy, and who you're fighting against. I've heard the boxing analogy. I've heard some baseball and football analogies. I mean, you know your enemy, and understand what their capabilities are, and that they're ever evolving, and they're working through elementary and crude ways to better themselves so they can be successful in killing Americans and coalition service members and civilians. We saw some of these crude, very elementary tactics. Pickup trucks with simply tubes in the back and left in a field, or simply just tubes left in a field with a washer or a dryer timer to go off in 30 minutes and what have you. General McIntyre, he talked about the composition. The only thing I would submit is the task force was put together in I would submit months versus years. It formulated out of Fort Hood and Fort Bliss. And as mentioned, when the sailors came to Fort Bliss for their mobilization process, that was our first time truly meeting the entire group of sailors, and the majority of them were maintainers. And they did bring that diversity, and I'm not talking about the skin color or the gender, but I'm talking about the diversity of the mind, and how they thought. From a Navy culture, it is different from an Army culture, and so to have a different style of thinking, and putting that in place and leveraging that style of thinking was beneficial to the entire task force. And we talked about the cultures of both the Army and the Navy. The senior sailor for each of those joint integrated batteries was the de facto deputy commander to the captain. Guys like Tony Dunant and Doug Simmons, as mentioned earlier. The other was John Brock. Couple differences. If I talk about the guns itself, we talk about the close-in weapon system, what you see on a ship. Different type of round fired, armor piercing on a ship for a CRAM weapon system. The phalanx gun fired the self-destruct high explosive type weapon, tracer burnout. So extremely important, because the question always came from senior leaders is, well, what happens when the round hits the ground? Well, it was self-destruct, so that was always a positive. The phalanx weapon system on that flatbed truck, it was capable. It had two radars, search and track radar. So it was capable of conducting a manual, or as you were, a automatic engagement. But as the soldiers and the sailors continue to refine their TTPs at their respective locations, and as General McIntyre talked about it, a large number of false alarms early on, false alarms decreased, and soldiers also recognized these named area of interest. And after studying where the enemy had been conducting any type of actions, that they were prepared and can conduct a manual engagement, vice waiting for a second sensor to recognize any type of indirect fire attack. General McIntyre mentioned some of the radars and the integration. That was really significant, and what a great lead into where we are today with everything that transpired in and around the Baghdad area, and that network of sensors from the Giraffe. The Mamba was down south initially with the British, but the Q-36s and 37 firefinder radars. General Lennox mentioned the lightweight counter mortar radar, the Sentinels there to clear airspace, all connected in one architecture over both wired and wireless through internet protocol. You never have enough when it comes to the high demand, low density. Leadership provides you the critical asset list, and you defend specific areas based on where those assets rack and stack. So I say that because of the passive measures that are needed. Again, something you saw both in Iraq and Afghanistan, specifically at HKIA. You got the hardening, the T-walls, the rocket roofs, the dispersion, and so forth. And as it gets short on time, I wanted to just very quickly talk about a couple. Every event, every RAM attack, rocket, artillery, or mortar, there was detailed analysis done, as mentioned by both speakers, and that analysis was sent back to the states as well, so the scientists and the engineers could actually help out and provide that information back to us in the event we needed to make an adjustment or tweak left or right. I think General McIntyre mentioned high water. I think the high water event for Task Force 3-3 was not just when the British departed Iraq and the responsibility they had for Basra, but shortly thereafter, American soldiers were killed. General Jacoby, the First Corps commander, said, "Hey, come up with a plan. How do we put guns in Basra?" We conducted the deliberate yet hasty military decision-making process, put guns in Basra, and it was within 48 hours that there was a successful engagement, because those enemy actors in southern Iraq were firing long-range 122 millimeter rockets, and they were really poking their fingers in the chest of the Americans down there, because they fired them every Thursday for 5 weeks between 8 and 10 p.m. From 15 kilometers or more, demonstrating that they knew exactly how to pinpoint those rockets. And so the move and the decision making by General McIntyre and the First Corps leadership of General Jacoby and Major General J.D. Johnson and others was tremendous, and the support greatly appreciated. As I close it out real quick, Riki, and I apologize for going a minute over. Just a couple thoughts. We've got to figure out how to replace this system, because it's just one portion of a layered air and missile defense capability that is much needed. And we've got to do it fast. We've got to speed up the acquisition process. Again, this is a capability. You heard from General Lennox, from General McIntyre. This capability was rapidly put together from a urgent need statement from a commander in the Middle East, And within less than a year, the Fort Bliss was producing formations to go fight and win in support of the formations forward. Again, we've got to identify the command and control suite and what that looks like. You know, the CRAM traditional had the FAT-C2 as mentioned previously, but we've got to come up with that type of suite, and we've got to think, you know, forward here. And the buzzwords, artificial intelligence, machine learning, machine-to-machine taskings come to mind. But how do we get beyond that? And it starts with a command and control suite. And then sensors, and then the actual kinetic and non-kinetic capability. Riki, I'll stop there. Again, thanks, appreciate it. God bless our soldiers and service members who continue to perform our work forward deployed around the world. Thanks again, Riki.
Dave, just one or two questions real quick. Can you give us the rounds per minute, just so people know what that is? And secondly, how many troops have done this mission, National Guard and Army, since you first deployed it? And how many troops have done this mission or are doing this mission, did the mission in the Kabul airport? So people understand what that size of that force is. And there's limiting factors on that. But I just wanted to get that little understanding of what it takes. And maybe if you could throw in, what's the most challenging job? I guess you can't pick, but what's the most challenging training you have to do for one of those positions? What position is that? But that may be too much, but I just wanted to hit that real quick before we open it up for questions.
Sure, I'll try to hit the highlights. Again, we talked about the 20 millimeter round and the difference between a CWIS and a phalanx on the ground. The rate of fire is about 75 rounds per minute, or as you were, 75 rounds per second, excuse me. And a standard engagement could be anywhere from, really, depending on the threat, anywhere between 250 and 500 rounds. I mean, if it's multiple rockets inbound and it's targeting a specific defended area of one or two guns, well, you might only just have those one or two guns engaging targets while a number of guns sit quiet. Something that had to be reinforced not only with leaders but just others throughout the theater, that if a round is not going to impact in a defended area, the gun will purposely not engage that target. But if you're within earshot of a warning, you know, take cover, you ought to take cover. The number of soldiers, and as I see General McIntyre on the screen, if I recall right, the combined task force was around 400. Is that about right, sir? Yeah. And then, as I understand it, at HKIA, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention them, it was the 101st Field Artillery Battalion out of Massachusetts Army National Guard who was performing the mission at the time. And Riki, I don't know if it was a battery plus, but that would be my assumption that it was probably anywhere between 50 to 100 soldiers performing that mission set. And as I understand it, they manned those guns up until the very last 5 aircraft. And so they were soldiers who boarded those 5 aircraft just before the 82nd Division Commander. We've all seen that picture. Over.
Thank you, Dave. I'm going to turn it over now to my fellow MDA senior fellow, retired Major General Joaquin Alva, to add his perspective and open up to the public. Joaquin?
Riki, thank you very much. It's always an honor, and I think everyone would agree that this panel is absolutely extraordinary. From the comments that we've received, and quite frankly, from the questions that really range from strategic to tactical, what I thought I would do to honor the panelists is bin these things in a way that makes sense. I would first like to address 2 themes that really came out of the comments, which I think are profound and relate, quite frankly, to what, Riki, you have said and what you have written. And I'll cover those 2 themes, which lead into, as a setup, the 2 types of questions that we received. One is, broadly speaking, about the tactical nature of the systems, and I'll cover that as we go forward. And the panelists can pick and choose which one of the questions or a combination of those questions that you want to answer. And then two, kind of the strategic way forward. So I'd begin with the first theme. I think there was general consensus that we must set national policy for defining what we must defend within the United States homeland, but do it in a way that has a global perspective with our allies and partners, and who might be best postured to defend those particular locations with our allies and partners. There's also comments on the fact, and I'm synthesizing here, that we must be clear-eyed about those defined capabilities, and David talked to it, and what we should have the services developed, and then integrate those capabilities within the right systems and forces. And I think General Lennox touched on the fact that, you must achieve synergy, effectiveness, efficiency, and it all has to be affordable. The second theme that was brought forward was that integrated strategic deterrence and defense that supports a larger, broader national grand strategic design must include these tactical capabilities. It must all be layered. As we've witnessed in Afghanistan, and this is what was brought out in some of the questions, even technologically sophisticated systems in the hands of most courageous combat-proven warriors saves lives, but perhaps more importantly, linking wise and seasoned national security policy to campaigns, to operations, down through to tactics, and to proven defensive weapon systems that can be used in unique ways in terms of operational art will save lives, livelihoods, and nations. So the first questions, or the sets of questions, were binned, and the panelists can talk about that. A lot of thoughts on Afghanistan as a microcosm in terms of the types of threats that we saw, beyond rockets, beyond artillery, beyond mortars, AI, ML enabled, artificial intelligence enabled UAS systems. Even some of our known terrorists are now highly sophisticated in terms of their operational art and capabilities. So your perspectives on the threats, your perspective on the performance capabilities of our tactical systems, and then your thoughts on what we need to think about in terms of future systems. That's the kind of the first bin of those questions, more tactical. Threats, performance parameters, and the future. The second question, perhaps more importantly, there is consensus that getting it right now, with the right investments in weapon systems and organizational responsibilities, and was touched on with diversity of thought and some of the roles and the nature of the roles being changed, is a national security imperative. So the second question seeks your thoughts and perspectives on how we might be able to balance and prioritize current and future investments across the range of missile defense and defensive weapon systems at the tactical through to the strategic level. Again, Riki, thank you, and probably it's best to have General Lennox go first, and followed by General McIntyre, then David as a cleanup.
Well, I thought I'd start, Joaquin. What great questions. Wow. The second question that you just asked about, prioritization and balance future weapons between the strategic to the tactical. Man, I wish there was an easy answer for that. That's a challenge that has faced us as a nation, as an army, as a missile defense community for decades. The threats are evolving so quickly. Tactical threats could have strategic impacts. Witness if something had gotten through in Kabul, and the catastrophic strategic impact that might have had there. So a very, very tough question, doesn't have a very easy answer. And I think we're always going to be asking ourselves, what do we do next? How do we integrate capabilities to make them better than what they are today? And the very nature of our defensive weapon systems has always been kind of like an insurance policy. The nation doesn't want to spend too much on them, but they want them there when they need them. And when you need them, they got to deliver and they got to perform. So it's this fine line of being able to address a range of capabilities that are extant out there, from near-peer competitors through nations like Iran and North Korea to the kind of drone usage that we've seen in Azerbaijan and Armenia. It's a very, very tough question that I don't have a very good answer for, but I'm sure Randy or Dave could pitch in on that and probably solve it for us. So I'll pause there and turn to them.
And Randy, just a quick note that we did have some parts of the questions did speak to Iron Dome, CRAM, and the integration JADC2, IBCS, that sort of thing. So it was kind of a mid-level operational art with systems that folks were interested in hearing more about.
Okay. Well, great. Thanks for let me try to build this out a little bit more, and thanks for setting the stage, General Lennox. Kind of staying with this integrated strategic defense, you know, some of the big thoughts I had were you know, air defense. So it's one of these capabilities that I think we find ourselves with our allies and partners, and ever since really Desert Shield, Desert Storm, really the price of admission to a country to have access has been a Patriot unit. I think it sells well. I think we find ourselves in a predicament a lot of times with our strategic flexibility with these capabilities, as Dave mentioned earlier, you know, high demand, low density. But it sells well when you think about leaders of different countries. They are able to bring capability that shows U.S. commitment on the ground while not putting a armored division or a brigade combat team that can do some offensive invasion type things that make people nervous. So it kind of, in terms of how you deter and maybe escalate, bringing in a defensive capability like this sometimes is almost the perfect answer. As you take a look at all the multiple threats, and certainly the counter UAS environment today is just exponential, expanding every day. Yeah, you need a layered and tiered defense, from the tactical to the strategic level, and they need to be linked and work together. There's no silver bullet solution. So part of it is educating decision makers that you need a toolbox of capability. And they don't like it because it's costly. And at the tactical level, obviously, you don't want to shoot a Patriot missile at something like that because it's unaffordable, and you'll lose, you know, your blood and treasure really fast doing something like that. So you got to develop these capabilities from the tactical to the strategic, and they all have to work. You'll get some people, and I'll give you, I won't say any names, but when I was the commandant, I would go into meetings in the Pentagon, and they'd say, well, we got a THAAD radar. It sees forever. Why can't we just take the THAAD radar and tie it to whatever system and call it a day? And they need to be educated. So you always got to figure out how to be smooth and articulate in terms of how you answer these questions, because ultimately they control a lot of the purse strings there and at Capitol Hill. But having a networked censored capability that's all talking to each other, I think, is key, where you pick the best shooter to take care of the mission. And I'll stop.
And David, just as we try to link some of the tactical systems to space-based capabilities, I know we perhaps didn't touch on that, but as Randy stated, it all has to be linked from the ground, and space is the kind of the new arena that people are trying to link their systems to.
Yeah, thanks, Joaquin. Yeah, I think an all-domain approach is a must, which includes information, electronic warfare as well. I think we'd all agree that space is getting very crowded, especially the lower Earth orbit area. And so, going back to my comments earlier, I think it starts with the command and control suite or suites, where you have that network architecture, where you're able to communicate across all domains, where you have that sensor capability, which General McIntyre just mentioned, and we've heard from this week during the fires conference regarding IBCS, any sensor best shooter. So, and I don't just mean from an air missile defense sensor best shooter, but again, across all domains. And I think there's a need to think not only just kinetic, but non-kinetic also. There are times when you don't need to fire a big bullet, and we as an American force, I've had the privilege to watch and observe some of these non-kinetic strikes that will put an adversary on their knees very quickly and render them helpless, for lack of better terms. The only other point I would make, Joaquin, just kind of in a broad comment, is really a relook at the policy in general and policies. As an American, we tend to play fair, and I think sometimes we also tend to focus on yesterday's news, and we've got to continue to look forward and be forward thinking and recognize, and let's just call it what it is, what our peer competitors are up to. People's Republic of China, what is Russia? What are they up to? What are some of these rogue nations focused on in the DPRK and Iran? And what are some of the non-state actors focused on and working towards? And we've got to recognize that. And some of this is through, I mentioned policy, but some of this is all through the use of legacy systems. There are legacy systems that can still be leveraged, but yet continuing to look towards the future. Thank you.
No, thank you, Riki. Before I turn it over to you, just a couple of comments. As the folks are very interested and certainly I think this panel probably could have gone another 2 hours. We covered micro-tactical, the relevancy of Afghanistan, the linkages to the global landscape. Everything is shifting. It's more complex, more lethal, more uncertainty. But the certainty of the bloodlines of courage, and I don't need to say this, but I think it's important for those that may be listening, from generation to generation is solid. It's sound. It's still about warriors, weapons, and ways and how we combine it. And General Lennox, you mentioned your daughter, and I will say that I am a son of a soldier. My father served in the 76th Tank Battalion, the 11th Airborne in the 50s. So again, I want to thank all three of you as fellow warriors, and turn it over to Riki as the preeminent warrior. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity. Riki.
Thank you, Joaquin. And in conclusion, the three of you and the maybe 1,000 of your soldiers, you've pioneered something that's spectacular. That's something that we're going to try to duplicate and be better at before it's time. To rapidly put a system in place at urgent need, to do the things you did with cross-service integration and make it work, and make it work so effectively that we could reduce the suffering, we could make that evacuation, we could and did defend the thousands and thousands and thousands of our troops over there, allies over there, is something that you should honor the rest of your life for what you've done in your leadership. And it was great to be able to highlight this under the troubles of what we have been experiencing with the withdrawal of Afghanistan. but it is a silver lining. It is something that we're going to take away from this 20-year war and apply it better to make other places around the world safe. So that's big time stuff. I mean, you live a lifetime to do something like that, and you gentlemen have done something like that. So I want to thank each one of you for taking the time here to do this. And we obviously recognize the great warriors out there today, and we recognize the systems that you have put forward. It's exciting. The future is exciting with integrated air missile defense. The future is exciting with strategic deterrent, exciting with tactical deterrent, that this is a huge part of. And I encourage you to continue to push forward and advocate on missile defense. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning into us and understanding this pretty complex capability and what it's done for mankind. So thank you very much.